All right, thank you so much. Most people are sitting. I'm very happy to hand it over to our panel. Krishna, please, you for the opening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning to all, and thank you for joining us for this conference on South Asia's path to resilient growth. This conference coincides with the launch of the book, which has the same title. And this book reflects a collaboration between the IMF staff and policymakers and academics from the region. So it's truly a case of strengthened engagement between the region and the fund. The book also integrates lessons from what we call our annual Article 4 consultations with countries, and how that the analytical work which underpins that work, and that's been reflected in the book. And we'd also like to thank the government of South Korea for financing this whole endeavor. And they've been very, very kind in their support as part of peer-to-peer engagement, notably in South Asia. Now, just to give a little bit of a backdrop on how we see things, as you all know, the region was ravaged by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and followed by the highly contagious Delta variant in the second quarter of 2021, at a time when vaccination efforts in the region were still at an early stage. By the time the Omicron variant hit in early 22, the region was much better prepared given impressive vaccination efforts. There was nevertheless a renewed surge in case numbers. And as GDP declined in 2021, the region saw an increase in the number of poor households and a decline in per capita incomes. Low-income households and women suffered disproportionately. So that's again an issue which comes up in the book quite well. Now, the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic that started in 2021 is unfortunately losing some momentum as the region is buffeted by three main headwinds. We talk about three main headwinds. The first is how the external conditions is worsening across the world, in part because of the war, and just reflects reduced demand for Asian exports, coupled with a shock in energy and food prices. Second, there's been a broad tightening of financial conditions across the globe, including in countries in the region where interest rates have tightened following a rise in inflation. And finally, what we've seen is a third headwind is China has witnessed a very sharp and uncharacteristic slowdown. In fact, the growth numbers in China are the second worst since 1977. So there are three major headwinds which has exposed the region to significant challenges. Now, while one could argue that South Asia is less exposed to these challenges, it is no way immune India's growth rate has slowed, partly reflecting weak external conditions and a tightening of financial conditions. We've also seen that Bhutan's economic outlook, Bangladesh's and Nepal's outlook, all outlook for these countries have also, in some sense, worsened in response to these three headwinds. So we have been actively involved in helping countries in the region recover and address these challenges. And in fact, we have had staff-level agreement with Bangladesh. We've had a staff-level agreement with Sri Lanka, and we are also closely engaged with Bhutan. So there are significant challenges for countries in the region. We as an institution are here to help. And with that as a backdrop, I'll ask our DMD, Antoinette Sayeh, to say a few words on how she sees the region, the elements in the book. So, Antoinette, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Krishna. Thank you for starting us off, and a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm, of course, hugely excited about being here this morning. Very happy to join all of you to launch this new book and interact with you. The theme of the gathering is indeed a very timely one. As Krishna noted, just as the global economy was recovering from the pandemic, of course, we are now being confronted with multiple new shocks and pronounced economic uncertainty. And over the past 2 decades, extreme poverty has declined from 500 million to fewer than 250 million people in Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. A remarkable success story for the region and indeed for the world. And per capita income during this period has doubled, helping to deliver improved healthcare, education, and infrastructure, as well as better access to financial services, the internet, and mobile technology to millions of South Asians. Now, poverty reduction cannot be taken for granted, of course, and is instead the result of policy choices. And identifying the right policies matters not just for the pace of growth, but also for ensuring that growth is sustainable, inclusive, and that it benefits all. And the key overarching question is, how can South Asia return to the growth rates of the past 2 decades, achieve resilient and climate-friendly growth without a renewed buildup of macroeconomic vulnerabilities, and resume the momentum of poverty reduction? And so those are the questions we'll be taking up today by drawing lessons from South Asia's own history, as well as from cross-country comparisons with peers. This book shows that the right policy design is crucial for the region's rapid growth trajectory. This becomes even more important as the effects of climate change are increasingly visible in South Asia. If left unaddressed, they could erase much of the progress on growth and poverty reduction. So the book explores 3 broad issues. The first main theme involves policies that make growth inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. And this covers a wide range of topics that we will touch upon during today's sessions. It includes the expenditure needs, of course, to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, improving equity through labor market and social protection reforms, as well as gender policies. And they also include the benefits of digitalization and policies to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Now, the second broad issue is the role of trade. Trade liberalization and the resulting diversification has helped South Asia narrow the income gap with other regions. This result highlights the large potential for further income gains from a renewed reform momentum and a better integration into Asian and global value chains. But unfortunately, there are increasing signs of geoeconomic transformation, fragmentation, as we all know. We see the number of trade restrictions rising, and the sectoral composition of trade restrictions has been shifting. Asia has gained a lot from openness and integration, and we hope for strong international cooperation to avoid fragmentation. But that said, South Asia still needs to prepare for the worst. The disruptions to key industries in the rest of Asia, however, provides opportunities for South Asia as global value chains realign. But to benefit from these developments, the region needs to put in place necessary structural conditions through further liberalization and regulatory reforms. For its part, India needs to leverage its existing strength in services exports and extend it to job-rich manufacturing exports by deepening its global value chain participation and complementary structural reforms that can boost productivity, formal employment, and exports. Doing so would create a virtuous cycle of productivity, growth, and a strong export performance. Trade and investment reforms by reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers for both goods and, in particular, high-value services, such as professional services, will be pivotal in raising competitiveness and establishing regional supply chains to benefit South Asia. And the third overarching topic in the book is the role of macro-financial management through sound monetary policy frameworks, financial development, and better public financial management to improve the scale and quality of infrastructure development. And given signs of fiscal dominance in several countries, a credible strategy for fiscal consolidation is critical to keep inflation expectations anchored. At the same time, the region's large infrastructural needs must be met despite limited fiscal space through a combination of enhanced but prudent quality of public investment and alternative financing strategies. And efforts must continue to strengthen the effectiveness of monetary policy frameworks. So in a nutshell, South Asia's future holds the promise of continued poverty reduction and rapid economic development that could make the region a powerhouse of the global economy. Unlocking this potential, however, requires bold reforms. History has shown that all South Asian countries have benefited from reform episodes in the past. They must build on these earlier successes and emerging opportunities to unleash a renewed dynamism. Now, to start the proceedings for today, we have the privilege to hear from Shaktikanta Das, the Reserve Bank of India governor, who kindly agreed to join us today from Mumbai. And we very much are grateful for that. The governor is well known, of course, to all of you, so he needs no introduction. I'll take the opportunity instead to say a few words about India's economy, given that we recently completed our annual health check, as we call it, in the form of the Article 4 consultations, and have published our staff report on India, have just published it. Having broadly recovered from the pandemic, India is a relative bright spot in the world economy today, growing at rates significantly above its peer average. Macroeconomic policies are responding to the significant headwinds, with fiscal policy measures supporting vulnerable groups and monetary policy addressing persistently high inflation. And a world-class digital public infrastructure is facilitating innovation, productivity improvements, and access to public and financial services. India is making important progress on its structural reform agenda, and further implementation of reforms would help unlock its considerable growth potential. So with this, let me now invite the governor to share his perspective with us. Governor, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. It was a pleasure to listen to the DMD, Antoinette, who has made it convenient to be here, and also Krishna. And I would at the outset like to compliment them for bringing out this publication, which is going to be released today. It's extremely relevant and very timely. Now, good morning to all of you, this distinguished gathering, and I'm delighted to have been invited by the IMF to join this distinguished gathering here today to discuss pathways to what was described as resilient, sustainable, and inclusive growth in South Asia. I'm happy to note that the conference proceedings will be anchored by research findings and policy recommendations of the book titled South Asia's Path to Resilient Growth. In the current international setting, global trade and growth outlook appear quite uninspiring, and policies have to be conducted amidst a whirlwind of uncertainty. At such critical times, conferences of this nature can help us better understand the evolving scenarios and policy trade-offs, which are not easy in the current times. In my address today, I propose to briefly cover some of my thoughts on South Asia's current macroeconomic challenges and policy priorities. Looking back into history, the South Asian region has been a key hub of ideas, commerce, art and culture, and similar other areas. Going back into history, the Indus Valley civilization was among the 3 earliest civilizations on Earth and was the most extensive. In the so-called Middle Ages, trade and commerce flourished in a variety of commodities such as spices, precious metals and other minerals, handicrafts, and also food items. Overall, the South Asian region has had an outsized influence on the progress of civilization and trade in the world. Currently, the region accounts for about 25% of world population. With a median age of 27 years, it is one of the youngest regions in the world. The average growth rate in the region has accelerated from 3% in the 1970s to about 7% in the latest decade, that is in the pre-pandemic period. Consequently, per capita income levels have risen alongside notable progress on key development parameters. As per the estimates of the IMF, South Asia contributes nearly 15% to global growth, led by India and Bangladesh. The region also receives 1/5 of total remittance flows in the world. The South Asian region has grown, responding to formidable global challenges in the past. Following the food crisis of the 1960s, with which all of us are familiar, the region successfully implemented the Green Revolution. And that brought about a huge change in this region in terms of achieving self-sufficiency in many parts of this region, and the earlier dependence on imports from other countries was considerably reduced. After the oil shocks of the 1970s, so that was in the 60s, and then subsequently after the oil shocks of the 1970s, immigration from South Asia to West Asia became one of the largest market-driven labor flows. This in turn led to a significant increase in remittance flows into the region. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 impacted the South Asian countries in terms of surges in capital outflows and exchange market pressures. Over the years, as a crisis prevention strategy, the South Asian countries prioritized sound macroeconomic policies and embraced financial sector reforms focusing on competition, prudential regulation, enhanced transparency, audit, and accounting standards. These measures helped in preserving macro stability while sustaining integration of domestic economies with the global economy. In recent years, multiple shocks, in particular the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, have dampened the economic prospects of the South Asian region as in other parts of the world. Some of the countries in the region have also been contending with ramifications of unsustainable debt and climate change-induced events. Consequently, they have been seeking recourse to the IMF's financing facilities. Notwithstanding these challenges, as per the World Economic Outlook database of October 22, which was released by the IMF, India, Bangladesh, and Maldives would be among the fastest growing economies in the world in 2022 and 2023. According to the Asian Development Bank's December 2022 outlook, the South Asian region's GDP is projected to grow at 6.5% in 2022 and 6.3% in 2023. The World Bank estimates that regional cooperation could be a win-win situation for all countries of the region. For example, intra-regional trade is currently only 1/5 of its potential. That is, intra-regional trade in the South Asian region is only 1/5 of its potential. And also, this implies that the annual shortfall, this has been calculated by the World Bank, this implies the annual shortfall to be in the region of about $44 billion US. The World Bank assessment also suggests that a common electricity market for Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal can yield savings of about $17 billion in capital costs. Investment in transport and logistics could also help reduce the cost of container shipments in South Asia. According to a study by the IMF, which was conducted in 2019, on South Asia, more than 150 million people will enter the South Asian labor force by 2030. The dependency ratio is expected to continue ebbing for almost 2 decades, indicating the strong demographic dividend of the dividend the region is set to benefit from. Now, with these positive, with this kind of positive factors, the point is there are critical challenges which I think Antoinette has very rightly, she has captured some of them very quickly, and these are the policy challenges which the entire South Asian region faces. And these challenges, as you know, have been accentuated because of the impact of the COVID-19, the spillovers from the war in Ukraine, the spillovers from globalization of inflation, the spillovers from financial market tightening that's happening all over the world due to almost a synchronized and simultaneous tightening of monetary policies in most of the countries. Now, in these circumstances, I would now like to focus on some of the desirable policy priorities for the South Asian region, and I have identified 6 such policy priorities. The first policy priority for the South Asian region is obviously taming inflation. Multiple external shocks in the form of COVID-related global supply chain disruptions, food and energy crisis following the war in Ukraine, and financial market volatility arising from the aggressive monetary policy tightening have exerted sustained price pressures in the South Asian economies, which is of course felt in other parts of the world also. Now, during the first 3 quarters of 2022, food price inflation in South Asia averaged more than 20%, and that's pretty high. The region's heavy dependence on imported fossil fuels has made it vulnerable to imported fuel inflation. For successful disinflation, credible monetary policy actions accompanied by targeted supply-side interventions, fiscal, trade policy, and administrative measures have become the key instruments. While the recent softening of commodity prices and supply chain bottlenecks should help in lowering inflation going ahead, risks to growth and investment outlook may rise if inflation persists at high levels. Prioritizing price stability may therefore be the optimal policy choice for the South Asian region in the current context. This approach to disinflation, however, needs to be mindful of the rising risks to growth outlook in an environment of deteriorating prospects for global growth and trade activity. The second policy priority that, apart from taming inflation, that I would like to highlight is containing external debt vulnerabilities. Now, the surge in external debt in recent years and associated vulnerabilities have undermined macroeconomic stability in several countries in this region. External debt, which was already elevated in low and middle income countries external debt which was already elevated in low and middle income countries that includes all the South Asian economies in the pre-pandemic period surged to US $9.3 trillion in 2021 from 8.2 trillion in 2019, an increase of 1.1 trillion during these 2 years from 2019 to 2021. The Debt Service Suspension Initiative, that is DSSI, was set up by the G20 in May 2020. Up to December 2021, an estimated $12.9 billion of debt service was deferred. According to World Bank, 60% of the 73 DSSI eligible countries are at high risk of debt distress or are already experiencing it. It is estimated that total external debt service payments on public and publicly guaranteed debt by poorest countries may rise by 35% to about $62 billion in 2022 and to remain high up to 2024 due to rising global interest rates and the compounding of interest on DSSI debt service deferrals. Even though The participation of private creditors was encouraged in the DSSI. Their response has not been encouraging. There has been a notable shift in the creditor composition of low and middle income countries between 2010 and 2021. The share of lending by private creditors in the long-term public and publicly guaranteed debt was 61% in 2021 against 46% in 2010. And the share of debt owed to bondholders was 47% in 2021 against 29% in 2010. A distinct shift in the creditor base over time in favor of private lenders and non-Paris Club official creditors has added a new dimension to debt restructuring processes, especially for the low-income IDA-eligible debtor countries. The share of debt owed to non-Paris Club creditors rose to 68% in 2021 from 42% in 2010. The increasing reliance on private creditors has raised debt service costs and complicated creditor coordination in debt resolution efforts. During 2010 to 2021, the average maturity on loans from private creditors was 12 years as compared with 26 years for loans from official creditors, and the average interest rate on loans from private creditors was 5% vis-a-vis 2% on loans from official creditors. Now, in this context, the role of multilateral organizations, but I have given too many data. Now it's, I thought actually for quite a while whether I should have it in a lecture or I should just leave it out. But I thought these are important pieces of numbers which are important to place things in perspective, which makes us understand the whole, the whole scenario much better, and also can guide us, especially the policymakers, the central banks and the fiscal authorities, to deal with these debt resolution efforts. A copy of my address will be uploaded in the RBI website soon after this address is over. So those of you who are interested may like to have a look at this, especially with regard to the numbers, if not the content or the arguments, but at least the numbers are important. Now, in this context, the role of multilateral organizations, particularly the IMF and the World Bank, it becomes crucial in making debt treatment efforts more effective, while also strengthening the mechanism of, I repeat, while also strengthening the mechanism of recording, reporting, and analysis of debt data so as to enhance transparency and preserve debt sustainability. The IMF's role in capacity building in the region with a focus on region-specific macro dynamics, policy effectiveness challenges, and economic aspirations of the nations would also be extremely useful. I now move to the third aspect of the third policy priority for the region, and this is in my view. That is with regard to, that focuses on raising productivity. While sustained and broad-based economic recovery remains the current policy focus, it is necessary to undertake deep structural reforms to raise the potential growth trajectories of the economies in the South Asian region. Ongoing global realignment of supply chains, green transition, and advances in technology offer new opportunities for investment and growth. But policies would need to create the congenial climate for attracting new private investment, with public sector taking the lead in areas that can create positive externalities such as infrastructure, health, and education. In this context, let me highlight, particularly in the context of raising productivity and what I have just said, in this context, let me highlight some specific areas of policy priority. First, undertaking desirable structural change would require an improvement in resource allocation, moving production from low productive sectors to high productive sectors, and promotion of innovation. Second, skill mismatches, which is a major constraint to resource reallocation, would warrant policy focus on education and skill upgradation. This is particularly important to the South Asian region as the favorable demography of the region would require that production processes must be labor intensive while also being globally competitive. Third, while free trade and FDI have been conventionally congenial for diffusion of technology and augmentation of productivity, the region's investment on research and development must also increase from the current low levels, and the policy environment for scientific research and startups must be made more rewarding. Fourth, investment in physical infrastructure consisting of energy, transportation, and telecommunication, which are prime drivers of productivity growth, also have to be enhanced. Infrastructure in the contemporary world of digital revolution would also include digital infrastructure, that is data centers, cellular towers, and fiber connectivity, with an emphasis on scalability and resilience. Fintech, e-commerce, edtech, health tech, and food tech are the new age growth propellers and need quality internet connectivity and reliable digital payment systems. I now turn to the fourth area of policy priority, and that is strengthening cooperation for energy security. The South Asian region has a high reliance on fossil fuels and imported energy, making the region vulnerable to volatile oil, gas, and coal prices. In view of the dominating influence of geopolitical factors in driving global energy market dynamics, the region needs to strengthen energy cooperation arrangements so as to enhance resilience to external shocks. India and Bangladesh have already agreed to enhance the sub-regional connectivity in the energy sector by linking the power grids of the two countries synchronously. The India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline project, which is a 130-kilometer pipeline joining Siliguri in West Bengal and Parbatipur in Bangladesh, would have a capacity to export petroleum products of 1 million metric tons per annum. Other examples of cooperation include transportation of petroleum, oil and lubricants across national jurisdictions. Similarly, cross-border petroleum product pipeline and joint venture hydroelectric projects are testimony to the immense scope for energy cooperation in the South Asian region. Harmonization of testing processes, performance and conservation standards, and labeling criteria for electrical appliances in the region can contribute to regional energy security by promoting cost savings and by boosting efficiency and trade. Integration of national power systems in the region could facilitate leveraging of untapped surplus hydropower while also giving fillip to development of solar and wind resources. Programs of bulk procurement and distribution of energy efficient appliances can be adopted by countries in the region. India, for example, has the Ujala scheme for distribution of LED bulbs at an affordable price. The next area, which is I think the fifth area of policy priority, is cooperation for greener economy in the region. South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change because of its large population and degradation of natural resources. Extreme climate events, that is floods, droughts, heat waves, and unseasonal rains, have increased over the past century. As per estimates of the International Financial Corporation IFC, between 2018 and 2030, the funding requirements for investment in renewable energy, greening the vehicle fleet, and making future building stock green and resilient to climate change risks in South Asia alone would be over $410 billion, 670 billion, and 1.3 trillion respectively. I mentioned the three components, and these are the investments required in the three components, and the three components are funding requirements for investment in renewable energy, 1, greening the vehicle fleet, and that is number 2, and making future building stock green and resilient to climate change. This is the third component, and the funding requirements have been mentioned. Besides financing, access to technology and key minerals would also be critical for successful green transition. Robust regional disaster management systems could help in ensuring timely and effective response to devastating climate events. India spearheaded the global initiative and launched a Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure (CDRI) in 2019. Another initiative, the International Solar Alliance, in partnership with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, aims at solarizing the world. The South Asian regions must strengthen cooperation to make green transition in the region faster and at reasonable cost. And finally, the sixth area of policy priority for this region, I feel, should be promotion of tourism, which has immense potential in this region. Now, tourism is one of the major contributors to the GDP of some of the South Asian nations, such as Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka. As a sector, tourism, as all of us know, is a huge creator of employment. The entire region has rich untapped potential in tourism. In recent period, the tourism sector has somewhat revived in the region, but is yet to reach the pre-pandemic levels, that is the pre-COVID levels. Intra-regional tourist flows also remain below potential. It has revived, but I think it has a way to go. Regional initiatives such as religious tourism circuits spanning countries that have common historical and cultural footprint, adventure tourism circuits, and medical, spiritual, or Ayurveda circuits can help boost tourism industry and create a vibrant regional value chain. Let me now try and conclude. With the global trade outlook for 2023 overcast, greater intra-regional trade in the South Asian region can enhance opportunities for growth and employment in this region. At the central bank level, a key dimension for cooperation in the region has been learning from each other on common goals and challenges, such as infrastructure financing, digital financial inclusion, reducing the cost of cross-border remittances by linking with the UPI system, and unconventional monetary policy, to name a few. Rupee settlement of cross-border trade and central bank digital currency, where the Reserve Bank of India has already started moving forward, can also be areas of greater cooperation in the future. Finally, let me just say that the book to be released today provides plenty of new ideas for forging cooperation in the region and seeking solutions to common problems through right policy interventions. I appreciate the efforts of the authors whose contributions have made this book possible. I do believe that the discussions during the day on policy choices will help us in reshaping the future prospects of the South Asian region. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your hearing.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you, Antoinette. I thought the book had a number of ideas, but the governor's speech in 3 pages had multiple number of ideas, what the book has. So thank you for that. We have 10 minutes for some questions. I'll open the floor. If you don't ask, I'll ask. So the floor is yours. Who wants to ask a question? To the governor or to Antoinette here? Anyone? So let me ask you a question, Governor, and Antoinette here. Both of you raised the issue of fragmentation in your recommendations and when you talked about your speech, Antoinette. We saw, beginning from the conflict between the US and China, the trade war, and recently from the fallout from the war in Ukraine, there's been significant increase in fragmentation, or at least the move towards fragmentation. How do you see that? Do you see that as an opportunity or a threat for this region, for South Asia? How do you see that, Governor?
I see it more as a challenge. This kind of fragmentation has been happening for quite some time, and it has got accentuated in the recent years due to geopolitical developments. The key to this entire challenge is to revive the efficacy of multilateralism. I think unlike previous global crisis, whether financial crisis or health crisis or any other forms of crisis, where multilateralism, perhaps, I mean, I feel the multilateralism was perhaps more effective. In recent episodes of, for example, the health crisis that we faced due to the pandemic, I think global cooperation and multilateralism could have played a far stronger role. So therefore, I think the critical challenge, I see this as a challenge, and the critical challenge for every country today is to revive the trust in multilateralism and to make multilateralism work. In this context, multilateral institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, they have a major role to play. And I think every country also must realize, I think as India's G20 theme quite rightly spells out, it's eventually one future which we will have to believe in and work towards it.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you, Krishna, and I couldn't agree more with the governor that it is indeed a significant threat to the progress that this region has seen in the past, this move towards fragmentation, and the importance of multilateralism, I think, in mitigating the impact and in actually pushing back against fragmentation couldn't be more important, and that is certainly part of what we're seeking to do at the fund. Very much focused on making sure countries understand the cost that fragmentation will entail for the world as a whole, for this region in particular, and the need to really make sure that countries are working vigorously to put in place the reform efforts they will need to do also to make sure that they continue to then integrate more into the global value chains and to of course, make sure that opportunities in Asia itself are better exploited. But fragmentation is dangerous, no question about that. And we all need to do all we can to push back fully against that. And we have done analytic work in the fund that demonstrates the costs of fragmentation, and we need to certainly make sure we disseminate that information a lot more so that policymakers are fully aware of how that potentially impacts them and can join forces to make the case for moving away from nearshoring and other such ideas that are out there and are potentially very dangerous to the global economy.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Antoinette. In fact, in a recent regional economic outlook, we have actually quantified that Asia stands to lose much, much more than the rest of the world if fragmentation risks come to materialize. Any question on the floor here? Yes, sir.
I wonder if I can ask the Governor what the prospects for regional financial and monetary cooperation are in South Asia, given that regionalism needs to.
No, specifically in the context of the central banks. Now, as you would know, we have the SAARC, the swap arrangement, the currency swap facility has been there for quite some time. And the countries, particularly in our neighborhood, around us, we have, India has provided under the SAARC currency swap arrangement, we have provided we have provided dollars under this facility to countries in this region, and this has been now, we have renewed this agreement, and it is in operation at the moment. At the moment, we have given out to countries in our region, to meet their dollar shortage, to meet the problem of dollar shortage which they have been encountering, especially countries, which depended on tourism and which were affected, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and had a dollar shortage to honor their external payment obligations. Now, I also referred to in my speech today to CBDC, central bank digital currency, and also to the linking of the UPI. Now, the payment systems in this region, UPI, we have already entered into agreements with countries in this region, for example, with Bhutan and other countries, with Nepal. And we are trying to sort of provide that UPI facility to make cross-border payments much easier in this region. Central bank digital currency we have launched. It's in a trial phase. We are moving about it very carefully, very cautiously, because this is something where we have to be very careful, and the approach has to be very cautious, very careful, so that, because, if there is a cloning or anything which happens, it can be very, very risky. So we are moving through it very carefully. So that could be another area where there can be room for cooperation. Then the other initiative that the Reserve Bank and together with the Government of India we have initiated is the rupee settlement of international trade. We are already in discussion with some of the countries in this region, and to facilitate rupee settlement of cross-border trade in the South Asian region. So that can be another area of, that is one area which has a very big potential in the years to come. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for your question on food price inflation and the impact on the most vulnerable, the poor, and what ought and can to be done and what can be done about that. We have focused on this issue quite strongly in the policy advice that the fund has been giving to our member countries in light of these spillovers from the war in Ukraine. And of course, emerging markets and developing economies and our poorer member countries are the ones where the share of food in their income baskets are significantly larger. And so they certainly need to make an effort to mitigate the impact of those high prices, what have been high food prices, on the most vulnerable, but that requires efforts to better target the support they provide, because they are also faced with the considerable debt vulnerabilities that the governor underscored, and the need to pursue fiscal consolidation in order to deal with those vulnerabilities and to make progress on debt sustainability. So that has to be a package. It's possible to work to mitigate the impact on the poor if one pursues a more consistent targeting of that support, not blanket subsidies, as we've seen in some places. And certainly not the efforts to also put in trade restrictions that don't help the poor. In fact, it just makes it significantly more difficult. So that advice, I think we are also providing capacity development support and helping countries to think through how they can also partner with institutions like the World Bank more fully to help them better target that support. But you raise a very, very significant issue that has been at the core of some of the policy advice we've given countries in the course of the last year, where they've all been so concerned about this, rightly so. Thank you.
So we'll take one last question. Okay, we'll take two last questions, Governor here and Rakesh after. So Governor, please.
So thank you, Governor, for very comprehensive you mentioned one thing. I think the mic is. So basically, in your concluding part, you just mentioned about the unconventional monetary policy measures and tools that can be used, especially given the global inflation, tightening monetary policy in the advanced countries, as well as the impact of commodity in as well as recent debates on what they call modern monetary theory, and region we are moving more towards inflation, flexible inflation targeting regimes. I would like you to, if you can please elaborate on what you meant by the unconventional monetary policy, especially in relation to what DMD mentioned about the fiscal dominance in the region. That's also one of the things that we are trying to deal with. So that's my broad comment that you would expect.
Thank you for your question, and good to see you and my other colleague governors from Maldives and Nepal who are participating here. Now, when I was referring to, first thing you referred to modern monetary policy. No, I am not a believer in modern monetary theory. Any fiscal expansion, any monetary expansion has to be calibrated, has to be targeted, and cannot be unbridled. So that is our view in the Reserve Bank, and that's my view also. Now, having said that, what I meant by unconventional monetary policy, I was referring to what we have done in the last 3 years in particular, after the onset of the COVID. Now, when we went for rate reduction of policy rate and liquidity expansion, our liquidity expansion was not again unbridled. It was prudent, calibrated, and targeted with specific, in most of the cases, with specific sunset dates, that is end dates. It was targeted because we had this targeted long-term repo, so it was targeted to certain NBFCs which had a liquidity crisis. It was in one situation, it was targeted at a liquidity shortage, which was the anxiety in the mutual fund segment. And so therefore, all the liquidity expansion that we did, where most of it was targeted, and most of it also had a sunset date. They were given out for 1 year, they were given out for 3 years, and they would all come back. Most of it has come back in that 1 year window. In the 3 year window, whatever is left behind, that will come back in March 2023. So therefore, that has really enabled us to deal with the problem of, again, pulling out the liquidity. It's very easy to inject liquidity, but very difficult to pull it out. And we did not want to find ourselves in the Chakravyuh situation, the famous Chakravyuh in the Mahabharata. We didn't want to find ourselves in that kind of a situation. So therefore, this approach has helped us to pull out most of the liquidity among various other factors which we had injected. And the other thing which I would like to say is that the rate actions also have to be accompanied by several actions in the financial sector, particularly for central banks like the Reserve Bank, which is also the banking regulator. We are the regulator of the banking system. We are also the regulator of the non-banking finance companies and the other aspects of the financial sector. It was also essential for us that while reducing rates, while injecting liquidity, we also look at the banking regulation side and provide very targeted, particularly in the COVID time, very targeted, resolution framework. So we gave a moratorium for 6 months, did not extend it beyond that, and we came out with a resolution framework for resolution of stressed loans, where again it was not open-ended, but we prescribed certain financial and operational parameters which every restructuring of loan has to achieve. It cannot be a situation that, a loan gets restructured for a period which makes it literally free, or which makes it, whose recovery absolutely difficult. So therefore, we prescribed that a part of the resolution process, when a loan is restructured, these are the financial and operational parameters they must achieve. The debt equity ratio shall not exceed this much. Infusion of capital, has to be minimum this much. So that kind of approach we had taken. And I remember we had during that period also under the SAARC arrangement, we had our, we could not obviously meet during that time physically, but we had our video meetings, and you would recall, or your colleagues in other countries would recall, that through these video conferences, we did share some of this information. And basically, I think there is no one size fits all. Every country, every central bank, taking into account its local factors, has to design its, policy, design its policy framework.
Thank you. One last question, Dr. Mohan.
Thank you, Krishna, and thank you for this very, very interesting session. So I really have a question for DMD Antoinette on the issue that was discussed a little earlier on more effective multilateralism. That is, the IMF's governance structure is highly outmoded, and you're going to have the quota review this year. The last one failed, and so the current governance structure, quota shares, etc., are really based on data that are at least 15 years out of date, that is prior to 2008. So my question is, and of course the global economy has moved tremendously in the last 15 years with the economic weight moving from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. And so the question is, what are the chances of a more effective quota review this year? And also particularly a third chair for Africa, which of course the World Bank has and IMF so far has refused to have one.
So very good to see you again, former Executive Director Mohan. Very pleased to see you, and thank you for that question that we're working, of course, on quite a bit. And I think we certainly, from our experience in the last quota review, of course, understand that countries have very different perspectives on where this what the results of this review should be. And we've been working with them to find areas of common ground and to make sure that there is ownership for how we approach the review. I think there good initial progress being made on that. And I think countries are all fully, of course, aware of the changed nature of the global economy, the changed contributions that individual members make to it now, and the need to align our governance structure with those changes. And so work in progress, of course, and a long ways to go yet. But it is our expectation that we will make progress, and it will be possible to come to a good outcome on the quota side. The issue of a third chair for Africa, is one that had been very much raised by some in the past, looking for equivalency on the fund side. It has not been a very active area of discussion in the past 3 years since I returned to the fund, but clearly it is not enough to add a chair without making sure that the representation of those chairs are effective and that their ability to actually impact policy making is enhanced by additional representation, which requires action also on the part of those country authorities that are electing their executive directors to make sure that they're fully capacitated to represent them appropriately and to be vocal about the needs that those countries have from our institution. And so we don't want to simply put in place a formality that suggests that there is more of a representation. There are other ways to do it, I think, in making the two existing chairs more effective. And I think that ought to be part of what our country authorities who may be asking for a third chair look at as well. So that's how I would respond to that very important question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you, Antoinette. As you know, this conference has been hosted by the SARTEC. And Governor, you are the force behind the establishment of the SARTEC. So today we are entering the second phase, or soon we'll be entering the second phase. So you've been a big supporter of the IMF, and you've been a very big supporter of the work we do on capacity development. And thank you again for coming all the way from Bombay to Mumbai to be a keynote speaker at this conference. And thank you, Antoinette, for coming with us all the way from Washington, D.C. So with that, we'll conclude the session. The next session will start soon. Thank you.